Hey everyone, it's Sarah and welcome to my crochet channel. Today's video I'm going to show you how to crochet our brand new pattern release called the Squishy Baby Blanket. We called it that because it's super squishy. Alrighty, so this pattern comes in 3 sizes: preemie, which is about 24 by 24 inches, a newborn size, which is about 30 by 30 inches, and then a basic baby size, which is 36 by 36 inches. But the pattern is a super easy repeat, and you can make it as wide as you want and as long as you want. Now, if you want all those stitch counts and multiples, you can also find all of that information on the pattern that I have written on the blog, and you can find that blog link down in the notes underneath this video. All right, let's talk yarn. The yarn that I used on this original blanket is a lot of leftover medium weight number 4 acrylic yarns. Most of it is just my style, but I also used some Red Heart Super Saver, some I Love This Yarn from Hobby Lobby. What I did is I just went into my yarn stash and pulled out a bunch of colors that I thought would look beautiful and make a nice striped pattern. But you can see, like right here where the color changed in the middle, we just added in using that Russian join and kept right on going. The stripes are not even. You can see some there's 3, some are 2, some there's more. And so the reason we did it this way is I received an email from a wonderful lady, and she said, I have all these pastel colors and I want to make a baby blanket. I want to make it for my new great grandbaby. I don't have a lot of money. Do you have a pattern that you can use your leftover yarns and make a baby blanket? And I said, you know what? I'm getting ready to do one, and I'm going to do just that. And so you're going to need about 8 ounces for the preemie size blanket, about 12 ounces for the newborn size blanket, and about 16 ounces for the regular baby size blanket. And so if you don't have a lot of money and you've got a bunch of leftover colors you want to use, and remember, it doesn't have to be pastels. That's just what she wanted. And of course, what I had on hand. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to do a swatch in order to teach you how to do the blanket. And I'm going to just be using some pastels that I have on hand, a pink, a mint, and a orchid purple. We're going to be stitching today with our eye hook. It's a 5.5 millimeter crochet hook. You'll need a needle to weave in those ends, and then of course you'll need a pair of scissors. We're going to begin with our foundation double crochets. I'm going to be making a swatch, and my swatch is going to be 21 stitches or 21 foundation double crochets. If you're making the preemie size, you're going to need to stitch 70 foundation double crochets. If you're going to be stitching the newborn size, you'll need 89 foundation double crochets. And if you're stitching the regular baby size, you'll need 106 foundation double crochets. All right, to begin our foundation double crochets, we're going to start with our slip knot, and then we're going to stitch 4. To make a foundation double crochet, yarn over, go in the 4th chain and pull up a loop. Yarn over and only go through that first loop. Yarn over and go through the second 2. Yarn over and go through those third 2. Yarn over, go in the chain that we made and pull up a loop. Yarn over, go through the first loop, yarn over, go through the next 2, yarn over, and go through the next 2. And so when you're making a foundation double crochet, you're making the chain and then the double crochet as you go. And I really love using this stitch for a blanket because it makes a nice stretchy edge, and it's also really easy to count those stitches. When you're doing a long beginning chain, it's really difficult to count all those stitches, and I can't tell you how many times I've gotten off. And so when I use the foundation double crochet, it's a lot easier to keep track of my stitches. You can also use a stitch marker, and I'll show you that. There we go. Our chain 3 counts as our first, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Let's do one more. So I have 10 foundation double crochets. I'll grab a stitch marker and I'll mark that 10th stitch. And so then I can do 10 more or 20 or however many, and I can mark it and I won't have to keep recounting. All right, so I'll just go right on stitching my foundation double crochets, marking it every 10 stitches, and I don't have to keep recounting. Now remember, you'll need to make the amount of foundation double crochets you need for the blanket size that you're making. Now again, I'm making a swatch and I'm going to be stitching 21 foundation double crochets. Once you have stitched the amount of foundation double crochets you need for the blanket size that you're making, we can take out our stitch markers. We're going to chain 3 and turn. The chain 3 counts as your first double crochet, and it will on every row. We're going to double crochet in the next double crochet. We're going to skip the next 2 stitches and stitch 3 double crochets in the next. And that's our shell stitch. We'll skip the next 2, 3 double crochets in the next. Skip 2, 3 double crochets, which is our shell stitch, in the next. And you'll repeat this all the way across your blanket. Skip 2 and 3 double crochets in the next. You'll repeat those shell stitches with skip 2 in between all the way across. You'll have 2 here to skip, and then you'll stitch 2 double crochets, 1 in each of those last 2 stitches, and chain 3. We chained 3 and turn. We're going to place a double crochet in the next double crochet, and we're going to chain 1. Now we're going to do what's called stitching 3 double crochets together. So we're going to yarn over, go in the first double crochet of the shell stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, and only go through the first 2 loops. Yarn over, go in the top of the next double crochet, pull up a loop, yarn over, and only go through the next 2 loops. Yarn over, go in the third double crochet, yarn over, and go through the next 2 loops. You'll have 3 unfinished double crochets plus the loop on your hook, so you'll have 4 loops. Yarn over, go through all 4 loops, and chain 1. And this is the stitch pattern that makes this blanket so squishy. All right, let's do it again. Yarn over, go in, pull up a loop. Yarn over, go through the first two. Yarn over, go in, pull up a loop. Yarn over and go through the next two. Yarn over, go in, pull up a loop. Yarn over, go through those two. You'll have 4 loops on your hook. Yarn over, go through all 4 of those loops and chain 1. And this is the repeat for row 3. And remember to do that chain 1 in between those little clusters. And again, this particular stitch pattern is exactly what makes this blanket so squishy. All right, we'll do 2 more since I have 2 more on my pattern swatch. There we go, and chain 1 and 1 more. And chain 1, and you'll repeat that all the way across your blanket, making sure you do the 3 double crochets together, which I'm calling a little cluster, on each one of your shell stitches. You'll end up with 2 double crochets at the end, so you'll place 1 double crochet in each of those 2 and chain 3. We've chained 3 and we're going to turn our work. Now for row 4, we're going to be stitching shell stitches again. So our chain 3 counts as our first double crochet again, and then we'll double crochet in the double crochet. And what we're going to do is we're going to place our shell stitch in this top stitch of each of our clusters. So we'll stitch 3 double crochets right in that top stitch. And it's going to look just a little bit, I'll get in there, a little bit offset. And that's the way it's supposed to look. See how it looks a little bit offset? That's the way that the stitch is supposed to look. So we're going to stitch 3 double crochets in the tops of each of our 3 double crochet cluster. We're stitching 3 double crochets together. One, 2, and 3. I have 1 more to do for my swatch. And so you'll repeat this all the way across, stitching a shell stitch, which is 3 double crochets in the same stitch, in the top of that stitching 3 double crochets together cluster. It's going to look a little offset. That's the way the pattern works. Once you've stitched your shell stitches across, you'll have those 2 double crochets on the end, and so you'll just stitch 1 double crochet in each of those 2 double crochets and chain 3. And so this is how row 4 should look. You'll have 2 double crochets at the beginning. You'll have our shell stitches in the tops of our cluster stitches, and then you'll end with 2 double crochets. Chain 3 and turn. So again, we're going to place a double crochet in that next double crochet. And now for row 5, we're going to stitch the cluster stitches again, which is stitching 3 double crochets together. And chain 1. The chain 1 in between on the cluster stitches is very important so it doesn't pucker up on you. You want this blanket to be nice and puffy and squishy and comfy, so we don't want any puckering of our stitches. And once you learn how to do this 3 double crochets together that we're calling our cluster stitch, it's super easy, and you're going to find this blanket is a really easy blanket to make. And I like a pattern that it's a really easy pattern, but it looks really pretty and actually a little bit complicated, but it's not complicated at all. So there's my last cluster stitch. Chain 1. And now I'm going to stitch 1 double crochet in the last 2 stitches. Now we'll chain 3 and turn. Make sure. And what you're going to be doing now is you're going to repeat row 4 and row 5 for as many rows as needed for your blanket. If you're making the preemie size, you're going to want to repeat row 4 and row 5 alternating rows for the next 43 rows. If you're doing the newborn size, you're going to repeat row 4 and row 5 alternating rows for 55 more rows. And then for the baby size, you'll do that for 67 more rows. Now, those are just the sizes that I have. You can add as many rows as you want to, and so you can adjust it whatever works best for you. So we're going to repeat row 4 and row 5 for as many rows as needed for the size blanket that we're making. Once you have done all your repeats of row 4 and row 5, make sure that your last row is an R4 repeat, which is the shell stitches. Chain 3 and turn. And what you're going to do is you're going to stitch an even row of double crochets all around the 4 sides of your blanket, and make sure you put 3 double crochets in each of the corners. And the reason you want to end on your shell stitch row is you have all these nice stitches to put your double crochets in. So you'll work across the top, stitching 1 double crochet in each of the double crochets of those shell stitches, and this will give us a nice even row of double crochets. So stitch a row of double crochets all the way across the top, and then I'll show you how to do that on the side. I've double crocheted across the top. I'm going to change colors just so that you can see better on the side of my swatch, because when you're stitching down the side, especially stitching double crochets, it can be a little bit tricky. All right, so I'm going to stitch 2 more double crochets in this corner of that same stitch, because you want to have 3 double crochets in each of the corners so that it moves around smoothly. Now, what you want to do is place your double crochets in the stitches of the sides of the stitches and not the holes. It'll give it a much better appearance. Now right here we don't have a spot, so I might go in between and sort of slide it in there like that. All right, we can stitch in the side of the stitch here. Let me come down a little bit there. There we go. You just want a nice even row. There is not a set stitch count, and of course every blanket is a different size, and so you're going to just do the best that you can to get your stitches nice and close, but not too close. You don't want them puckered up and getting ripply, but you don't want great big spaces either. So you want to try to get them nice and even. Try to work in the side of the stitch and not the holes. And basically you just have to eyeball it out and see where to put those stitches. Like I can't get it in there, so I'm going to go in between those two stitches, or those two loops of that stitch, and put a stitch in there. And then I'll put one right next to it like that. All right? And you'll work your way down the side of your blanket like that. And then you'll get to that first, or the second corner actually. And this is pretty easy because this is our row where we started our foundation double crochet. So we're going to stitch 3 double crochets in that corner. Whoops. And then we'll stitch 1 double crochet in each of those foundation double crochets across. See how that moves smoothly around that corner? All right, so what we'll do is we'll stitch across the bottom of the blanket in those foundation stitches, 3 double crochets in the corner, work our way up the side like we did over here, and then we'll join back to our first chain 3 where we started. And then I'll show you how to do that really pretty trim. So I've completed a nice even row all the way around my blanket on my swatch. Of course, this is much smaller. I'll have to put this in the Barbie house. Okay, so we stitched on those sides that are a little bit difficult. We had stitches on the bottom and stitches on the top. But it looks nice and even. You want your stitches smooth and even, not ripply and not far apart. All right, so let me pull that out real quick. I have 2 here, and then of course the chain 3, so we're going to join to that chain 3 with a slip stitch. And I am again going to change colors so that you can see how to do that trim. So I'm bringing in this pink, and what we're going to do is we're going to single crochet in the first stitch. We're going to chain 1. We're going to skip the next 2 stitches and stitch a shell stitch. And our shell stitch is 3 double crochets, just like we did on the blanket. We're going to chain 1. We're going to skip the next 2 and single crochet in the next stitch. See how that looks? We'll chain 1, skip 2, and stitch a shell stitch in the next. 1, 2, 3, which is our 3 double crochets, chain 1, skip 2, and single crochet. Chain 1, skip 2, and 3 double crochets, which again is our shell stitch. Chain 1, skip 2, and single crochet. And that is the repeat that you'll do, working all the way around your blanket. And this is how your trim will look on your blanket. Shell stitch, skip 2, chain 1, single crochet in the next, chain 1, skip 2, and shell stitch in the next. And you'll notice that I just worked right around the corner exactly the same. And it makes a beautiful, beautiful trim all the way around the blanket. It's a simple trim, but it looks beautiful. One thing to remember is because the sides of the blanket do not have a set stitch count, because it's just working evenly, when you go back to work in the end, it may not have the exact count. So keep that in mind when you're joining back to where you started, okay? You may be off a count or two, and you may have to adjust that just a little bit, especially if you added more rows, or you just never know, because the sides of the blanket do not have a set amount of stitches. But isn't that a beautiful pattern and an easy pattern? And it's a squishy blanket. I cannot wait to give this to somebody. Whoever next has a baby is going to get this blanket. So that's our squishy baby blanket. You can make it in 3 sizes. You can make it as wide as you want or as long as you want. And it doesn't have to be a baby blanket. You can make it in whatever colors that you want and for whatever